like the rushing of a mighty wind, like the rushing of a mighty wind.
But let's really talk about where we need to go from here on, and that is the fact that black people have every sense of entitlement as it relates to having reparations. And I'm gonna tell you why, right? Because nobody has ever been as more loyal to white people despite the treatment than black people have, right? Nobody. You show me one race. You know what? They make options and opportunities available when other ethnicities come here or what have you that we will never get a chance to have, right? And then they turn around and tell us, stop asking about reparations. Whenever we want to ask for equality and fairness, it's a problem.
So
white America.
So it's spent several $1 trillion. When is it enough?
Wait, we spend $7 trillion on what? What did we spend it on?
Let's go.
It'll never be enough. It'll never be enough. Doesn't matter how many trillions you spend. It'll never be enough. You heard the man. Several $1 trillion on what? Several $1 trillion on what? It'll never be enough. None of the federal programs that were put in place throughout history, it'll never be enough. And it'll never be enough because the oppression has never stopped. It's been ongoing and it continues today. You're going to have to pay for the oppression that's going to happen in the future. So they want that as well. So it's never going to be enough.
Wait, we spent $7 trillion on what? What did we spend it on?
Let's go back to Lyndon Johnson model.
Lyndon Johnson, you're talking about the war on poverty? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
1965?
Why was that done?
All right, but here's the deal.
What about
So, the Great Society program is what Crowder mentioned. So I'm gonna ask ChatGPT about that. I said, what is the Great Society program? And was it a response to calls for reparations? And that's the important piece, I think, is whether or not it was a call for reparations. And here's what ChatGPT says. It says, excellent question and a very important one for understanding how post-civil rights era federal policy interacted with the idea of reparations. Here's a complete breakdown. What was the Great Society? The Great Society was a series of domestic programs launched by President Lyndon B. Johnson between 1964 and 1968. Its overarching goal was to end poverty and racial injustice in the United States and expand access to education, healthcare, and housing. LBJ announced the vision at a University of Michigan speech in 1964, saying the Great Society would rest on 3 pillars: the elimination of poverty, the elimination of racial injustice, and the advancement of quality of life for all Americans. The major Great Society programs: the War on Poverty in 1964 to 1968. There was the Economic Opportunity Act of 1968, which was created, or rather, that act created the Job Corps, which is training for young people, VISTA, which is a domestic volunteer service like the Peace Corps, community action programs, which are local anti-poverty agencies, and Head Start, which is early childhood education. The second type of program was the education programs. So the first was the War on Poverty. The second is the education programs, which are Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, the first major federal funding for K through 12 schools, especially in poor areas. The Higher Education Act of 1965 expanded federal scholarships and loans. The third type of program is healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. Medicare is health care insurance for seniors. Medicaid is health coverage for low-income families. The fourth type of program are civil rights and voting rights programs. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed segregation and discrimination, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 protected Black voting rights in the South. Fifth type of program was housing and urban development. HUD in 1965 was a new cabinet department. The Model Cities program funded urban redevelopment. And I think Crowder mentioned the Model Cities program as well. We may talk about that a little more. Number 6, the sixth type of program is the environmental and consumer reforms, like the Clean Air Act of 1963 through 67 and Highway Beautification Acts of 1965, among others. All right, now the next question is, was the Great Society a response to reparations demands? And ChatGPT says no, not explicitly. The Great Society was not designed as reparations for slavery or segregation, but it was influenced by the same moral and political pressures that fueled reparations debates. And I think it's fair to say that that's what Crowder meant, that these programs were fueled by those pressures from those reparations debates. And it says, here's the nuance, the factor, motivation. It gives a factor and then a relation to reparations. So the motivation, the relation to reparations is that LBJ's policies responded to the civil rights movement's exposure of racial inequality, poverty, housing discrimination, and unemployment. He sought systemic reform, not direct compensation. So, can this have been seen as a response to reparations? Yes. But instead of direct compensation, this was in the form of systemic reform. The design. Great Society programs were universal, meaning they targeted poverty and inequality across all races, though they disproportionately helped Black Americans in the South and urban areas. So there you have it. And I think this is going to be the objection to why this cannot count as a form of reparations. And I think this is why it wasn't presented as a form of reparations. It's simply because it was for everyone. If it's for everyone, it cannot count as reparations for Black people, as far as Black people are concerned. If it's for everyone, then it has nothing to do with slavery. It's just a remedy for poverty, and everyone that's in poverty gets this relief. But it's not reparations for slavery. Because people who were not victims of slavery still got access to this fund. So that's why it's not going to be enough. None of this stuff is going to be enough, because all of the things that he's talking about, all Americans had access to, as long as they fit certain criteria. But it wasn't race-based. Reparations has to be race-based. Goes on to say, connection to reparations movements. In the mid-1960s, some civil rights leaders, for example, James Foreman's Black Manifesto in '69, explicitly demanded reparations, but those calls came after the Great Society began. The government did not frame the Great Society as reparations in any way. And it could not have been. It could not have been framed as a way of reparations because the government wanted to serve all people in poverty. Reparations is only to serve Black folks. And unless it's serving just Black folks, it won't be seen as reparations by Black folks. Political framing. LBJ deliberately avoided the term reparations because of the political backlash that would have followed. Instead, he presented programs as a war on poverty, benefiting all Americans. And then there's that. It just would not have been politically expedient or the politically smart thing to do. And then it says impact on and reparative outcomes. Although not reparations in principle, the Great Society had reparative effects in practice. Black poverty fell from 55% in 1959 to 30% in 1970. Black high school graduation and college attendance rates rose dramatically. Federal funding integrated segregated schools through conditional aid. Medicare and Medicaid closed health gaps between white and Black Americans. However, critics noted that these gains didn't transfer wealth or property, and by the 1980s, many programs were defunded or scaled back, leaving structural inequalities intact. Yeah, so in summary, what was it, the Great Society program? Answer, it was LBJ's 1960 social reform agenda to end poverty and racial injustice. Was it reparations? No, it was not framed or implemented as reparations for slavery or discrimination. Did it address racial inequality? Yes, especially through education, housing, and health initiatives. Relation to reparations debate is indirect. It emerged from the same moral climate but avoided the politically charged term. And it gave a historical context quote where LBJ said, "We seek not justice, not just equality as a right and a theory, but equality as a fact and equality as a result." All right, so there we have it. Was the Great Society program created out of the call for reparations? Yes, it can be seen like that. You know, if we look at reparations as part of the whole civil rights movement at the time. But was it presented as reparations? No. Could it have been presented as reparations? No. Will it be accepted as a form of historical reparations? No. Black people will not accept that. If that's what you want to be enough, that will not be enough, because it was for everyone and everyone was able to take advantage of that. Black people want an advantage. They feel like they've been disadvantaged and they want an advantage. They even want an advantage over people that are poor like them, or even more poor than them. They want an advantage because they feel like they've been disadvantaged over everyone. And again, even the ones that are less advantaged than they are today, they still want an advantage or more of an advantage. And that's what reparations is about. And that's kind of why it'll never be enough.
All right, but here's the deal.
What about the Department of Education?
Here's the deal. So now you're saying the Department of Education. Let's go back to the Department of Education.
Okay,
You gotta
so-
take it off.
What about the Department of Education? So that is what I asked ChatGPT next. I said, was the Department of Education started as a response to reparations? And it says no. The U.S. Department of Education was not created as a response to reparations. Its origins are connected more to educational reform, federal coordination, and civil rights enforcement, rather than any intent to compensate formerly enslaved people or their descendants. Here's the breakdown by era. Early origins, 1867 to 1868, Reconstruction context. The original Department of Education was briefly created in 1867, right after the Civil War. Purpose was to collect information and improve educational systems nationwide not to distribute aid or reparations. Connection to Reconstruction. It emerged during a time when education for freedmen was a national focus, largely due to the Freedmen's Bureau, 1865 to 1872, which did build thousands of schools for formerly enslaved people. However, Congress quickly reduced the department to an Office of Education within the Interior Department in 1868, fearing federal overreach into local schools. So, the timing overlaps with Reconstruction and efforts to educate freed people, but it was not a reparations measure. Instead, it was part of a broader movement to modernize education across the entire country. So even here, even with the Department of Ed, it's not going to be enough. Whatever grants, privileges that Black people received from the DOE throughout history is not going to be seen as enough for reparations because it was not given as reparations. It was given to everyone. It was across the board to modernize education in the whole country. And everyone took advantage of that or benefited from that. Reparations, as far as Black folks see it, reparations is for Black people only. So they would not even have seen that as reparations. And for the other reasons that we saw with the Great Society program, it would not have been politically wise to present it as a reparations program either. So, ChatGPT mentions the modern Department of Education. It says the current U.S. Department of Education was established under President Jimmy Carter in 1979, separating education responsibilities from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Purpose was to oversee federal funding, enforce civil rights laws in education, example Title IV and Title IX, and improve coordination of national education policy. So this modern DOE is definitely not just for reparations, because again, it's about civil rights, and civil rights is more than just about Black people and their civil rights. It's also about women and gay rights, and it's about a bunch of things. So it says the context, it was partly a result of the civil rights movement's legacy, especially the need to enforce desegregation, equal access, and funding equity in schools. Some historians view this as a product of the civil rights era, but not a reparations program. So it cannot be seen as enough of a reparations program when it was not a reparations program. It cannot be seen as enough for a reparations plan when it was not even seen as a reparations program. The relation to reparations. It says Freedmen's Bureau schools from 1865 to 1872 were closer to a reparative policy. They directly addressed the needs of formerly enslaved Black Americans. The Department of Education, by contrast, has always served as an administrative and policy body for the entire nation. With that said, some of its programs like federal Title I funding for low-income schools or Pell Grants for college students have reparative effects in addressing inequality, but they were never designed or described as reparations. So in summary, it says in 1867, the original Department of Ed was created. It coincided with Reconstruction, but it was not reparations related. It just so happened to coincide or, happen at the same time. But it wasn't just reparations. It was to fix up the whole country, not just to fix up the Black community. In 1868, it was downgraded to the Office of Education. It was purely informational, no aid distribution. In 1979, the modern Department of Ed was established, and it was created for policy and equity enforcement, not reparations. In 1867 to 1872, the Freedmen's Borough Schools were created, and it says, yes, these are closest historical link to reparative education. So the Freedmen's Borough is more reparative than anything else. Now, will the Freedmen's Bureau be seen as enough of a reparations plan or enough of reparations being paid? Absolutely not. Because they never really followed through on what the Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to do. It was defunded pretty quickly, and it never really had much of any teeth and didn't really get much of anything accomplished. So the Freedmen's Bureau, the DOE, as far as Black folks are concerned, neither one of these are going to serve as counting towards reparations, much less be enough of a reparations, because everybody got them. It wasn't just for us. It was for everyone. So it's just not going to be enough.
My point is, hold on. No, I didn't answer your question.
All right.
The reason that this was given, right, when you're talking about the Great Society program, the reason when you look at the Model Cities program, urban planning, $8 billion into Detroit, adjusted for inflation, the reason that, and I don't know if you know this, Black students in this country get more spending per pupil than white students. I don't know if you know that. That's an actual fact. Even in impoverished neighborhoods through public funding. These were the reparations that were asked of white people throughout each decade given, and then we're told, no, that's not the real one. They were given, whether you like them or not, whether you think they work or not. And by the way, I think they're dog shit. I think we should completely suspend the federal Department of Education. I think the Texas state could do a much better job. But those were done in the name of racial reparations because they were demanded, and now it's not enough.
So Stephen is being clearly dishonest here. Either he's being dishonest or he's just misinformed. But none of these programs were given as reparations. None of these programs were offered as a form of reparations. Could they have been responses to what was going on to the environment, the civil rights environment, and they wanted to do something specifically for Black folks? Sure. But they were never offered as reparations. And this is not the reparations that Black folks were asking for. This is what was offered to them. They offered them the DOE, but they weren't asking for a DOE. They offered them the Great Society program, but they didn't ask for a Great Society program. This is what was offered, but it's not what was asked for as far as reparations. Reparations was about land, especially when right after the Civil War and right after emancipation, right after the 14th Amendment, Black folks wanted land as a form of reparations for the most part. Black folks wanted land. They wanted land for themselves. They didn't want a program for the whole society that benefited everyone that was poor. They wanted land for themselves. And Black people today want cash money for themselves today. They want their check. They want their check. So everything here, so this was not offered. So again, just to reiterate, none of these programs were offered as reparations. Reparations were asked for, and this is what was offered, but they were not offered as a remedy for reparations. They were offered as programs for the entire society that was a good way to proceed for the country. So where does that leave us? I mean, because it's not what they asked for. It's not what they asked for, it's what they were offered. For that reason alone, it's not gonna be enough. Because it's not what they asked for. It's not the land they asked for, and it's not the cash that they're asking for. So it's never gonna be enough.
Say that, but Steve, listen.
What was that?
Say we should suspend the Department.
I agree with you, because it's so. Why would they
But
do
it's
it
not
correctly?
because it's not just because it was done in the name of racial justice that it was done incorrectly.
That's the reason for it.
I'm saying that's the reason for it. But along the way of trying to achieve racial justice, you just did it wrong.
But let me ask you.
That's my point.
You said
People did it the way we were
The
asked.
reasoning was right.
First he says that it went wrong because it was done in the name of racial justice. That's why it went wrong. And I don't know if I agree with that either. I think it went wrong because it was a federal program. Any federal run program is just going to go bad. It's just not going to be run efficiently. I think that's the main reason, not because it was done for racial justice. It's a bad idea because it was for racial justice. But it wasn't run bad because of that. It was run bad because it was government run. And then he continues to say, people did it the way we were asked. No, they didn't, Stephen. Cut it out. You know better. And that's the thing that irks me, is that Steven Crowder knows better. Because no one knows about the inefficiencies of government than Crowder. So it was never done. The government doesn't ever do anything the way it's asked to do it. And especially not here in this instance. The government did it for what was politically the wise thing to do. It wasn't wise to offer anything based on reparations. It wasn't wise to just give anything just for black folks. So, and that's what black folks were asking for. Black folks were asking for reparations, and reparations was not offered. So how are you going to say they did it just the way they asked of it? That's just crazy and disingenuous. And I don't know, it just makes it feel like he's just not being sincere with the discussion. I would question his sincerity in having this discussion if that's the position he's going to take. It was not what was asked for. What was offered was not what was asked for. So to answer his question, what's going to be enough, or when is it going to be enough? To answer his question of what's going to be enough, all of the stuff he mentioned, the Department of Ed, the Great Society program, the Model City program, all of those things that he mentioned, they're only going to be enough if we pretend as if that's what was asked for. But it's not what was asked for. And we cannot just pretend as if it was to say, okay, there you go. It's just not an honest way to have the discussion. It's not what was asked for. What was offered was not what was asked for. So you cannot shut people up with that. You just can't. Everyone benefits from what was offered, not just people that are descendants of slaves. Everyone who qualifies benefits or has access. But it's not what was asked for. You know, some people make the argument that what the government, you know, sends out in terms of welfare to Black families, that should also count as part of their reparations program. But it's not what was asked for. We're not going to pretend as if there's any reparations program that asks for welfare. It was never asked for as a form of welfare. So if reparations being paid means it's what they asked for, you can't use welfare either. And you can't use any of the stuff that Crowder's trying to use. You can't use welfare. You can't use affirmative action, because none of these were asked for or were offered as reparations, especially asked for. They were neither asked for as reparations nor offered as reparations. So it is very disingenuous to now say that reparations have been paid because of those things. It's just not a strong argument in my view. All right, y'all. Thanks for listening. Like the video, hit that subscribe button. You know, all of those things. Let's do those little things that make a difference. All right, y'all, be good. Blessings.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them up to one hygiene not eat. That's why enough of them get rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 bills we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep an eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go live. Them never yet plant and not try figure it. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. This a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah, 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 yeah. Everybody just a pre-success. When me looking at the street, you me see enough stress. Them all a fight for who reach up next. Everybody want floss and a beat up chest. Juvenile in a them teen love sex. Them a breed the fast money, them no need subjects. And if you're unfortunate, please don't vex. I saw the thing said cause the streets don't rest.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them up to one hygiene not eat. That's why enough of them get rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 bills we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep an eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go live. Them never yet plant and not try figure it. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we submit. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah, 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 yeah.